11th meeting of the Livermore City Council. I now call the meeting to order. I'll let the roll show that all members of the council are present and accounted for. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Let's see, for the city attorney, was there any reportable action taken in the closed session?
Mr. Mayor, no, there was not.
Okay, very good. Thank you. There's no proclamations and presentations. Moving on to Citizens Forum. These are items that are not on the agenda. The City Council can neither take action nor deliberate on anything during the Citizens Forum. Okay, I ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. We have Angie Marshall, Greg Scott, Mike Kremer. Angie Marshall, now's your chance.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Marchand and council members. My name is Angie Marshall. I was here this time last year and spoke on an item on the agenda to dispose of the 5 city-owned townhomes at Station Square. I expressed my desire to purchase the unit as well as asked for clarification on the definition of the first-time homebuyer program under which they wanted to sell. After a thorough review of the history of the program and research of public records, I'm now in need of even more questions answered by the Housing Department. I'm requesting that the Housing Department please respond to my inquiries so that I can get some concrete answers to my questions.
Okay, thank you very much. We've taken note. Mr. Spence, thank you. Greg Scott, Mike Kremer, John Stein. Mr. Scott.
I am Greg Scott. I speak on homelessness in Livermore. I'm speaking on agenda item 3.0, Community Forum. I looked up the word forum, and one definition is a public meeting place for open discussion. This certainly is not an open discussion here. This would be more aptly called community soliloquy. You all have the last word here in these chambers without discussion from the audience. I have directly and continuously witnessed homelessness in the Livermore Valley for over 39 months. The problem is not getting better. However, you all have the last word and can tell me perhaps that the suffering I see of the homeless and the degree and the dying of the homeless that's out there is a misperception of mine. I am not asking for pity for the homeless, for pity is insulting and solves nothing. I witnessed my friend Carl Feiner face down on the ground trembling to his death. 10 years of homelessness in a truck finally killed him. He certainly was not benefiting by the regional expense average of $120,000 per homeless person. It was stated at the last city council meeting that tough sheds are an inefficient use of space. An 8-foot by 10-foot tough shed is an inefficient use of space when how much square footage sits vacant in buildings in Livermore. A tough shed certainly would have extended Carl Feiner's life and improved the quality of his life greatly. The City Council in September voted unanimously for $2.65 million for land for Vineyard 2.0. How many tough sheds could be purchased for $2.65 million and placed in an empty building, such as the vacant Orchard Supply Hardware building, and have money left over for remodeling the existing bathrooms to put in showers and have money still left over for a full-time attendant 24/7? There is the immoral and unethical deep wound of homelessness resulting from socioeconomic political injustice and socioeconomic political inequality that rips into the heart of this community. And I have to convince anyone of this? Isn't it rather obvious? It takes committee and or prolonged deliberation to get even one porta potty or one dumpster to a homeless encampment. In these chambers, I have listened to at length about such things as ducks in a duck pond and what side of the street Livermore's downtown best exotic marigold hotels should go on. These topics are so much more important than human beings. At the start of the calendar year, the badly decomposed body of a 23-year-old woman was found in the Altamont landfill. Whether foul play was involved, I have not heard. She was identified by her fingerprints, and she was a homeless woman with mental illness issues and controlled substance issues. No portrait for her. Was she so much a piece of trash to us, or did she happen to be a human being? As long as I am able, I will not give the injustice of homelessness the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Mike Kremer, John Stein, Carl Wente.
Hey, Mayor, I'm going to pass.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you.
John Stein, Carl Wente, Jacob Anderson.
John Stein, 1334 Cathy Court. One of the major attractions of the Civic Center site now, after 40 years, is the large number of mature trees. I noticed that the city is going out for bid on a sidewalk replacement program, and I'd like some assurance that no harm will be done to the existing street trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Carl Wente, Jacob Anderson. Mr. Wente.
Carl Wente. I live just outside of town. Honorable Mayor, City Council, again, I just want to thank you all for what you do to serve the community of Livermore. City staff, Mr. Roberts, again, you run a great ship and a great crew of people that are very much helpful to the endeavor of making this world the best place that it can be. And again, an inert citizenry is one of the most dangerous things to a democratic republic. And so may we all rally around the beautiful system that we have here in America. And I thank y'all so much. For those that put on a bulletproof vest to go to work, I salute you for what you do in enhancing public safety. Mr. Chief, thank you for what you do. I salute y'all. Thanks much.
Thank you, Mr. Wente. Jacob Anderson.
For the most part, I'll just ditto what Carl said, but there is one specific thing that I did want to thank the council and especially city staff is the temporary parking on the dirt lot downtown with the barriers and the grading has made it so much nicer as a person that frequents downtown a lot. It is much easier and efficient for people to use that lot temporarily until we actually get a parking garage. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. That is the Citizens Forum. And moving on to the consent calendar. These are items which are typically routine in nature, and they're typically passed with a single motion. Does anybody wish to pull any of the items on the consent calendar for discussion? Do I have a motion? Moved by Councilmember Warner.
I'll second.
Seconded by. Okay, I heard this one. I heard this one first. Okay, seconded by Councilmember Coomber. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Passed unanimously. 3 times in a row, no public hearings. Good heavens, we must have gotten a lot of stuff done at the end of last year. So moving on to matters for consideration. This is the selection of candidates for the Planning Commission interviews. So we have received the resumes from the candidates for the Planning Commission, and staff recommends the council review the applications and select candidates for interview at a special council meeting, which will be held February 21st. All right, so with that, I will bring it back to the, council questions first, I guess. And then, does anybody wish to speak? Do we have any cards on this? Okay, so with that, just bring it to the council. What's the pleasure of the council as far as the applicants? We've all had an opportunity to go through the applications. Do you want to recommend everyone, certain individuals? Vice Mayor.
Yes, thank you. Looking at the applications, I was a little disappointed in one. There seemed to be pretty minimal effort from Ms. Hosterman. And I guess from my point of view, I would recommend that we not interview her, since I think we need to rely on both the written application as well as the interview. Mm-hmm. And I thought that needed some more work.
Okay. All right. So So there we have one that we recommended not be brought forward to an interview. Conversely, I think that we had a very strong application from Regina Bonanno. I think she was a very strong candidate. I'd recommend that we do interview her.
Yeah, I thought all the other applications were just fine and worthy of conversations with us. It was just, if at least from my point of view, if we're asking people to apply for these positions and I'm looking for a little more effort, I guess, was looking for a little more effort, and then and didn't see it from that one candidate.
Mhm.
But I thought all the rest of the applications were reasonably well done, and I would urge that we interview the balance.
Okay, so you suggest the rest of them?
Yes, I would suggest the
Okay.
rest.
Any further discussion from the council?
I've just been, I went through them. I would agree. I wasn't sure. Sure, let's interview 7.
Pardon me?
Let's interview 7 of them. I guess the one question I have is there a number that's better or worse, or you just take everybody? I mean, everybody has done due diligence, so in terms
Depends on how many people the council wants to interview.
so we can, there's 8 total applicants, taking one. I'm trying to understand if there is better to eliminate 3 now, for example, or and interview 4 and taking out the one that was incomplete, or whether just going for all that have been everyone who's done due diligence is the thing to do. And I'm really just looking for. I would agree with Vice Mayor Carling that if the decision is to go that those people who have done due diligence are worthy of. If we have no limits on how many we interview, let's go for everyone who's done due diligence.
Well, and this is Mene Tekel Upharsin, right?
I'm sorry, I have no idea. What?
Mene Tekel Upharsin. You've been weighed in the balance. But so we have one that would suggest interviewing 6. No, we have one suggesting interviewing 6, and we have one suggesting interviewing 7.
There are 8
No, there's
candidates.
8.
Oh, 8. I'm sorry.
8 candidates.
No, we're in
Okay. All right. So very good. All right. So that's right. Okay. So you would suggest anybody else?
I would just, I went through them all, and I noticed on several, I don't say several, a couple, that the answers weren't what I was looking for. They're a little short, and I'd love to interview all of them, quite honestly. I would be very happy to be able to do that and make my decision with a face-to-face look at them. I'd
Okay.
like to see that.
So we have all of them. Or
876.
877.
877.
877.
Okay, there you go.
Okay. So we have 877. Okay.
I'm good with 7.
Okay. So it looks like 7 it is, since that seems to be the consensus. Okay. With that, then we will set up a schedule on the 21st to interview the 7 candidates. And what would be the pleasure of the council? About 20 minutes per? So figuring,
Does the clerk have a recommendation?
was the whole council, so we're all going to be asking questions.
Well, I know that, but
Yeah.
what have we done in the past? I was just asking the clerk.
Good evening, I'm Sarah Bunting, City Clerk. I can tell you in the past, we've generally aimed for about 15 minutes, but you do have the flexibility to go a little longer, go a little shorter.
Well, the regular commissions and committee assignments, I think, are a little more. They're a little simpler, but something as extensive as the Planning Commission, a little more time, I think, and that would be. You figured that'd be roughly 2.5 hours then. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, 2.5 hours, 20 minutes each candidate.
Well, with probably some slack time in there. So I
Sure.
plan on 3 hours.
Oh yeah. Well, the minimum of interview time is 2.5. Okay, so about 3 hours then?
I have one more question of the city clerk. Do these people all know that this is when the schedule is? I mean, they need to interview to be a candidate, right?
They've all been informed regarding the interview date all throughout the process.
Okay.
We advertised that,
Yeah.
and I don't believe I'd have to look into it, see if there's a requirement that they be interviewed. I don't have that information in front of me right now.
Well, it's a requirement for other commissions and advisory bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would guess so, but, okay.
So you want to start that around 6? The reason being is if we're looking at 3 hours, that's going to be taking it up to 9 o'clock. And I don't think if people are coming in on one of the later interviews, they're going to be coming in after 8, 8:30. So if you started at 7, they would be coming in after 9.
How about
So we-
6:30?
We've had 6:30 as our target.
Right.
We can certainly
Okay.
see if we can bring people in a little earlier.
6:30 works for me then.
6:30.
Everybody else? Oh, good. I see 3 nods on that side, so okay. All right, very good. Okay, so at 6:30. All right, I guess that was quick. Okay, in that case, 6.02, we're done with 6.01, moving on to 6.02. This is discussion and direction regarding state housing legislation, the Casa Compact. Tricia Ponto and Steve Riley.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Mayor. So the goal of this item is to get your feedback on our draft housing policy framework, which is a response to the Casa Compact and anticipated state housing legislation. But before we dive into that, I'm going to walk you through just a little bit of background. So back in 2017 and 2018, the state passed extensive housing legislation due to concerns around lack of housing production and housing affordability in the state. And the measures aim to streamline housing projects, establish funding sources for more housing, and assign accountability to local jurisdictions if land was developed with fewer units or less affordability than was intended in its housing element. All cities and counties in California are required to accommodate their fair share of the regional housing needs, and a city's fair share assignment is determined through a regional housing need allocation or RHNA process. And that includes requirements for 4 income categories, which are very low, moderate, and above moderate. Most of the cities in California are having trouble reaching their RHNA goals, particularly for the low income categories. And a big reason for this is because a substantial subsidy is required to build low income housing, given the high cost of housing, both sales and rental markets. And there just isn't an adequate local, state, or federal funding to meet the need. In December 2018, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, or MTC, released the Casa Compact, which represents a significant response within the Bay Area to the housing crisis. And the compact provides an ambitious 10-point plan to remedy the Bay Area's housing issues and is also intended as sort of a roadmap to influence the upcoming state legislation. So we anticipate that the upcoming 2019 legislative cycle will include another round of housing legislation that is similar in nature to what we see in the Casa Compact. And individual legislators are already beginning to draft bills that remove barriers to housing production, particularly around transit. So the big example we've seen so far is SB 50, which is Senator Scott Wiener's bill. And that would require the city to modify development standards if the project provides low-income housing and is located in a job-rich area or a job transit area, which will be defined in the bill. And the League of California Cities representatives have indicated to us that it's no longer productive for us to just say no to proposed housing legislation that takes away local control, and recommends that we instead be proactive and suggest improvements to the proposed bills to make them more acceptable to our community and to address our most pressing concerns. So now I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and he's going to walk through the draft housing policy framework.
Thank you, Tricia, and good evening, Mayor Marchand and members of the City Council. I'm Steve Riley, Principal Planner with the City Community Development Department. As Tricia said, consistent with the League of Cities recommendations to constructively and positively influence legislation so it meets both the state and local goals, the city staff has been meeting recently with the Tri-Valley cities of Dublin, Pleasanton, San Ramon, and the town of Danville. The goal of this informal working group is to develop a unified legislative framework for responding to both the Casa Compact and the future state legislation on housing production. The Tri-Valley cities are identifying areas where we can collectively attempt to influence legislation and to ensure that new housing fits into the local context and to better manage impacts associated with increased housing development. On the screen are the staff recommended draft legislative policy framework themes. So I'll walk through those one at a time. And I'll add some additional objectives underneath each one that is not on the screen. So the first one is balanced solutions, housing, jobs, and transportation. Building and preserving housing is only one component of solving the housing crisis. Regional solutions require a balanced approach that consider the development of housing, transportation, and jobs together. Building housing without adequate transportation infrastructure and disconnecting housing from jobs may worsen, not alleviate, the housing crisis. Regional transportation agencies must support improved transit services, such as the proposed Valley Link regional rail system from the Central Valley to the Tri-Valley, as one example. Number two, protect affordability. Protect existing affordable housing stock, including apartments and deed-restricted units, and promote new affordable housing stock. Number three, context-sensitive housing. Ensure policies and laws allow for development that is sensitive to its local context. Provide opportunities for cities to develop locally appropriate plans for higher density housing and transit-oriented development, which are both compatible with existing neighborhoods. And finally, support the development of accessory dwelling units, a relatively low-cost housing alternative. And accessory dwelling units are something that all the Tri-Valley cities strongly support and would like to further and facilitate the construction of those units. Number four, infrastructure and services. Mandates for new housing production should be accompanied by funding that supports expanded transportation. That same funding should also support the demand on infrastructure such as roads, schools, sewer, water, library, and emergency services. And finally, funding and resources. Funding measures should not unduly impact local taxation capacity or divert financial resources from essential services. Funding should be increased where state mandates create new programs, reporting requirements, and new regulations. While this approach provides common areas of concern for the Tri-Valley cities, each city will continue to pursue its own individual areas of concern that are unique and sensitive to its own needs. And then, in wrapping up, our recommendations and next steps are as follows. We're asking this evening that the council provide feedback on the policy framework that we just went over. And we'll take that feedback as we go and continue to meet with the Tri-Valley cities and incorporate that feedback into their housing paper and policy framework that will be provided to the City Council at the end of February. The next step would be to return to a regular City Council meeting in March to adopt a more detailed city legislative policy framework on housing based on the Tri-Valley cities housing policy framework. And finally, we will then take that information and work with our advocacy firm, Townsend Public Affairs, to identify and coordinate opportunities for the city and the Tri-Valley cities to engage with local, regional, and state representatives regarding housing policy and legislation. That concludes staff's presentation, and we are here to answer any questions you may have.
So one of the purposes this evening to bring the item to you in its draft form is that housing legislation is in the process of being drafted right now. You noted we laid out a work program here that's going to take the next 4 to 6 weeks. A number of the issues may be ultimately moving through committee during that time period. So we do want to get your initial take on these draft framework policies. What generally happens is there's multiple changes to multiple bills in a very short time frame, and of course that's why we use our legislative platform to guide staff in our response to those changes. So for that reason, we have a draft document in front of you this morning. It is not, or this evening, good, it's not this morning yet, this evening. And what we'd like is, if you concur with this, or if you need to make adjustments to this, we will use during the interim period, these as our guidelines as we interact both with the other cities, with our lobbyist, and with the state legislature.
Okay. Comments at this point? Questions? We do have one speaker card, so questions at this point? Any questions? Okay, very good. One speaker card, then Mr. Stein.
John Stein, 1334 Cathy Court. One of the major problems over the past decade has been the Plan Bay Area, which the MTC, ABAG, and the Bay Area Council are sort of pushing, that says you put the jobs around the Bay and you put the housing somewhere else. And I think one of the important issues should be both jobs housing balance and jobs housing match. The companies want to have these iconic, massive projects that are basically all office with perhaps, 20,000 employees and 1,000 housing units. It doesn't work that way. What's happened is, with rapid growth, the transit systems and the roads can't keep up if you put the employees 40 or 50 miles away. So I think that should be something that at least is mentioned. Also, the people who do the planning in general, both at the state level and the local level, generally live in large cities, Berkeley, San Francisco, San Jose. And they tend to understand how systems work in cities, but they don't seem to be quite as familiar with the way things work in suburbs and fringe cities. They assume as a given a robust public transit system. Yet in most cities, the transit system is fragmented, underfunded, and often very difficult to get around. I mean, you can get anywhere in the valley on public transit if you have 2 or 3 hours to spend getting there. It's very inconvenient. So another thing is the planners sort of think that cars are sort of an option. In most suburban areas, it's almost a necessity. The transit system is designed only for those people who are too old or too young to drive or handicapped in one way or another. And so what they do is they limit parking, they limit roads, not the major transit corridors, but the internal road system. And what happens is it overloads everything. So I think that needs to be looked at. Also, when you talk about infrastructure, you should probably talk about parks and recreation and shopping, as well as schools, public safety, and the other things that were mentioned. Finally, I think demographics need to be addressed. A lot of the affordable housing is studios, one-bedroom apartments. Yet currently, the Generation X and Y are sort of at the end of childbearing years and sort of look at it as an emergency, and the millennials are just forming families. So good schools and larger apartments will be needed. Finally, I think any unit that's built, whether it's $1 million house or a $500,000 condo or a single unit occupancy, at one point or another trickles down to affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Greg Scott.
Greg Scott. I like the idea of it's the chief executive officer of a company in France, Engie. It's a large energy firm in Paris. And she says what we have to do, it's in part what we have to do. We need to decentralize, we need to digitize, and we need to decarbonize. We can't keep going like we are this way. The average car commuter out there in California is putting 14.6 tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And that's part of California's somewhere around 450 million tons of carbon dioxide. It's part of humanity's 36 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We can't keep going like that. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It's been shown to cause thermal energy increase on the planet by a 10-year experiment with what's called an infrared interferometer at UC Berkeley, headed up that project. We have the orbiting Carbon Observatory 2 satellite from NASA that can look at emissions on columnar base diameters of 3 kilometers. I'll let you figure out the resolution of a percentage of that on a planet of 450 million square kilometers. Certainly, we can't keep doing what we're doing with fossil fuels on transportation. We can't do it as far as quality of life, the amount of time people are spending in their cars, and the link with housing. So people have to live out in Modesto to get an apartment for $900 versus getting a $2,500 apartment in Livermore. There is a great social inequity in that, and even the governor doesn't seem to get it because you're linking gas tax with housing. Well, these people have to live out in Modesto, and they have to spend money on the gas, and it's a regressive tax. They're paying more of their percentage of their income on the tax than other people. The electorate didn't seem to get that in Proposition 6 in the last election. So part of this, with this system of housing and the transportation, is a war on the poor, a war on the working class. And you're keeping people down, and you're creating greater and greater social inequities, greater and greater social injustice. And when does this break? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. That's the last of the cards that I've got, so I'm going to close the comment period and bring it back to the council. Comments from the council? Councilmember Monroe.
So in general, I'm very much in support of the policy framework. I would be even stronger with regard to funding and resources, and here's where I find the regional aspect of this to be particularly problematic. I understand that we are working as a 5-city region, and I understand that we have actually no way to compel anyone else to fund the problem. But here's the thing, is that when you look at where as has been said, when you look at where the jobs have been created and you look at where the housing has been created, it's not being addressed. I don't know how to make that happen, but the phrase that I used, and you can use, I'm not going to take yours away from you, but I hope you say it later on, is that the profit, the profits are generated elsewhere, and we end up with the problems. I would very much like to see this be address the regional issues in some way. That said, for Livermore, I think this works for me overall. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Councilor Vice Mayor?
So, first of all, Ms. Ponto and Mr. Riley, thanks for the report. Thought it was well done. There are no penalties for not reaching our goals. Is that right? I mean, that's there's no stick. Is there?
Not at the current time, but your friends at the state are working on a variety of sticks. So one of our items there is that we are hoping that the sticks actually are designed to get what we're actually hoping for here, rather than to be an indiscriminate beating.
Okay. Good. I'm glad to hear that, I guess. But there's nothing in Senator Weiner's bill that talks about that, is there?
There is not. Governor Newsom has noted his desire to tie it to a variety of different funding sources, some of which are protected by the Constitution. But the details of any of those ideas have not actually turned into legislation yet.
And I think I concur with Councilmember Monroe's issue about the funding. And I think, look, whatever you think of Senator Weiner's bill, I know a lot of people think it's draconian and it's stealing local control and that sort of thing. And I think the League of California Cities has come up with a reasonable point of view, and that it's time to stop saying no and figuring out how to work on this. But at least from my point of view anyway, I think Senator Wiener is making us talk about this and trying to do something about it. Whether you agree with his approach or not, I guess I appreciate him having the backbone to stand up and trying to do something about it. It is disappointing, though, that even on our own numbers, we're doing pretty well with the moderate and above moderate. I think that's what it's called. Is that right? But we're woefully behind on particularly the very low and the low. And I certainly hope that we can begin to work on that. I recognize that we've talked about this being a regional issue and we're working with the other cities in the Tri-Valley, but I also think that we need to look at ourselves and try and figure some of this out too, because we owe it to the residents of this community to provide housing for a variety of people irrespective of their income level. And right now we're way behind on the very low and the low. So whatever we can do to strengthen that, I would certainly hope we could figure out how to do that. And I don't know what we can do to try and entice the legislature at the state level to work with us on some of the funding that's going to be needed for the housing for the very low and the low.
Councilmember Warner?
A couple of thoughts. It starts with, first of all, I agree that we should focus on the low and the very low because of, I think we're doing okay, and especially the plans we have underway. But I want to go back to just the beginning of what we're talking about here is that we're required to accommodate their fair share. And whenever you use a word like fair share, you got to ask, who's the decider of fair? Right? And I think what we're pointing out is that it's the inner bay that's the decider of fair, right? It's not necessarily everyone. I think that it's pretty, in my mind, clear that the origin of the problem is within Silicon Valley and the number of jobs that are created there without adequate housing. I think that in Livermore we have what's our balance between housing and jobs? What's our ratio?
I have 1.3 to 1.
It's 1.3 to 1, which it actually is where you want to be, because we have about 1.3 employed resident per house and about 1.3 jobs per house.
Right. So,
however, we're not perfectly matched. We export people in the morning and we import people. But
no, I understand that.
The gross number is pretty matched.
Right. And, you go to, I remember being in Atlanta, and they've got a beltway there, and it's jammed in both directions, and you wonder why the people who are going one way don't live on the other side, right? So I understand that, but generally where I would come from is we're balanced in the gross number where we should be. I think that wherever we work here and the point we make, the other communities within this region should also be balanced, and then let's talk about it. But the thought that we should solve the problem created by the peninsula and San Jose just doesn't make sense to me. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. So whatever we can do to work the agenda where everyone is fairly balanced, then we'll talk about fair share, right? So that's my attitude on this. And the other point is, Vice Mayor Carling brought up, there aren't sticks, but you remind me, we at least have to allocate this in principle. And communities that don't even go that far, then they do bear the brunt of lawsuits. And I think our neighbor had that happen to them. So there are some things here. You can't be egregious in just thumbing your nose at this thing. But I think that we have a lot of good plans. We have, I think, gone to great lengths, maybe more than other cities, to apply affordable housing, right? I think, what did we say we had 1,000 units in the last few decades, and in the last couple of years, we've added 500 to that pipeline. So that's pretty huge. And let's see other cities do something in that proportion. And again, once they do their fair effort, then let's talk about fair share. That's kind of where I'm at.
Down to this end, I'll be quick. I agree mostly with the vice mayor about the noticeable lack of very low income housing and stuff that we have yet to address, and that's a big deal with me. And I get very uneasy about these things because I just keep thinking that you get a region as big and diverse as the Bay Area, and we're all supposed to be kicking in the same, along the same lines with a rigid set of rules. You've got assembly members and state senators promoting things from bigger urban areas and have their own idea about what a city should look like and think every city should look that way. And I'm just not so concerned. I'd rather stick with taking care of our own. And I've been an environmentalist for a long, long time. And just know that a lot more housing, at some point we have to talk about stop growing so much. And that's not just for Livermore, but that's for our entire state. We passed 40 million. We barely have water to keep up with what we're doing now. We have a good snow year this year, and people will say, let's start building because we've got all this snow. Well, just a few years ago, we had 6 years in a row where everything was substandard, and we were grappling then to try and make things happen. So it makes me uneasy to talk about all this growth when we can't, without the jobs factoring in. We don't know what they're going to be putting in. We don't know where this water is going to come from. People mentioning tapping into the Columbia River. Are you kidding me? And it's, that's a huge thing that no one in Sacramento wants to tackle. And I think at some level we'll have to take it up because there are so many factors out there that are not being discussed. And losing open space, losing habitat, every normal rainfall, snowfall year is a drought year because of our population is something that concerns me more than anything right now.
Okay, thank you.
Quick question. I have a quick question about Senate Bill 50. They talk about transit stops, right? And I think we have two. Is that a fair assessment for the ACE train?
Correct. The downtown ACE station and the Vasco ACE station.
What would help me a lot is that there's, at least in the legislation, they talk about a half-a-mile radius exempting projects, and there are various things like parking and so on and so forth. I think it would help me and maybe all of us thinking about this if we had if you could draw a circle around those two with a half-mile radius to give us a sense of what we're talking about here if and when that passes. So
yeah, we actually have that exhibit. If you'd like, we could pass it around.
And we can certainly bring that back our next time. One of our questions for our state legislators is we don't believe that all train stations are created equal. Something where a San Joaquin train shows up once a day seems very, very different than a BART station. And so our ACE trains, of course, have 4 trains in each direction. One of our questions is a clarifying one to the legislature staff. The bus essentially concept has headways, and we would assume that they would apply the same headways to a train station.
I see.
Because literally, I mean, in the most absurd example, would you had a train station where trains no longer come? Still a train station, so you'd like to actually have service as a part of that basic requirement. It's not in the bill yet, so staff did answer you correctly. It is certainly possible that our 2 ACE train stations would be covered by this.
Sure, and I think my only point is that it would help me in my thinking, and if and when it ends up in the bill, that it would be useful, I think, for all of us to understand what that looks like.
And we'll bring that back as part of your next presentation.
Appreciate it.
You'd also want to include the Valley Link thoughts?
And on that one, the good news is you've already done a little planning around one of those, so we can also show that.
Thank you.
All we need is to find the funding for it. minor little details. Do you have another comment?
I do.
Okay.
Before you or
Okay.
after you?
Well, let me go ahead and run here. We mentioned AB 2923, which we were talking about the putting housing on BART property. And of course, we don't have a BART station, but BART has property here. So it comes down to what these definitions are. The definition of what high-quality transit is. As the city manager pointed out, 15-minute headways on BART is very different from running 4 ACE trains a day. So not all transit is created equal, so we need to define what that is.
And I generally don't associate BART and high quality in the same sentence.
Okay, then. Thank you. One of the things that always strikes me is when you look at the talking about the Casa Compact, and you see that the acronym is CASA, and it stands for Community to House the Bay Area, which doesn't make any sense. And a lot of the stuff in here, just for our perspective, does not make sense. To the Vice Mayor's point about the difficulty of creating housing for very, very low income. Well, one of the reasons it's so difficult to create affordable housing is because of what's happening in Silicon Valley, San Francisco, and Oakland. We had a presentation at the Alameda County Transportation Commission last month, and there are counties in the Bay Area that are creating 8 jobs per housing unit, as many as 17 jobs per housing unit. Well, the law of supply and demand tells you that if you've got too many jobs and you don't have enough housing, it creates that demand, which then drives up the cost. And that's one of the reasons that it is so incredibly expensive to live here, is because of all the hundreds of thousands of jobs that have gone into San Francisco, Santa Clara counties, and Oakland. 500,000 jobs, 60,000 housing units. Which is, when you look at the CASA steering committee, it was comprised of the cities and the agencies that have caused the problem. You had San Jose, San Francisco, and Oakland. Those 3 agencies, along with Transform, all opposed a transit solution to 580. So all these cars coming over the Altamont, driving to San Francisco or the Silicon Valley, they opposed a transit solution, but they're happy to take the other 13 cities in Alameda County. Oakland it was on the steering committee. Nobody else was, but yet they're looking for us to pay for their solution. And we don't have a seat at the table, but they're asking for us to solve the problem. So we've talked about this. Going back to Councilmember Cooper's point, water. If you've got the governors wanting to add 3.5 million housing units, and the State Water Project can provide a long-term sustainable supply of 1.7 million acre feet, and they've sold 4.2 million acre feet in contracts, it doesn't take very long to see that it's not going to be very long before you're in trouble. So before anything else is done, they're going to need to create new water. That's about 1.5 to 2 million acre feet a year. That's the equivalent of the long-term reliability of Lake Oroville. So we need another Lake Oroville. And we haven't built any storage in 30 years in this state. So we've talked about this at ACTC. One of the suggestions in the Casa Compact is to waive the fees or property tax increment. Property tax increment is what I use to fund the police and the fire for this community. We need to be made whole if they're going to eliminate those fees. A lot of these fees are also collected by special districts, Zone 7 Water Agency. It's not the cities that collect that connection fee for Zone 7, or the parks, or the school districts. They all have to be made whole. And if we're going to be talking about raising funds for this effort, it's kind of a two-pronged issue here. Those funds should stay local. If they're going to take money from Livermore, we need to use those funds to meet the needs here. On the other hand, since we have employers that are moving into jobs-rich areas, one of the suggestions that came out of ACTC is to create a head tax that would be paid for by the companies moving into the job-rich communities. And maybe we make that head tax a multiplier of what the jobs housing imbalance is. Well, those funds could then, if we talk about return to source, those funds could then go to create housing in those communities where they're creating the jobs, where they have the 17-to-1 jobs housing imbalance. So you start to bring that back into alignment, so you remove the burden on the transit systems. So this concept of a head tax that would then create a funding stream to provide additional housing since they're bringing in the jobs. So a couple of different ideas like that, but very problematic to the city, and we're going to be staying on top of this. We had another brief conversation today on it, so stay tuned. We're going to stay within the discussion, stay in the conversation, and hopefully everybody's going to be required to work on the solution and not just have one group that create the problems and then look to the other cities to solve it and pay for it. So with that, thank you very much. Do you have sufficient comment? Councilmember Monroe, you have another point?
Actually, I think you covered pretty much everything I would have said.
Okay.
I will top it off just by saying I'm still concerned with how you make this happen. I mean, locally we can do what we can do, but the regional just strikes me as being
So what
really
I heard,
beyond.
excuse me. All right. So what I heard was general concurrence with the items that were listed in the framework, an emphasis essentially on the final one, item 5, funding and resources, some specifics around that. If there are funds created, returning them to source. In certain cases where people are further out of whack, perhaps essentially more funding is generated from those items. And then a couple of you mentioned, at least at some level, that the legislation needs to take into consideration, jobs, housing, balance, at least at some sort of gross level, maybe not down into the details of that, but the further out of whack you are, perhaps the more onerous the state legislation becomes in those areas, so that we don't end up creating a problem in one area and transferring it to another. And with that sort of addition, and you did note from staff, is these were the items that garnered broad agreement across the 5 cities. Livermore, of course, is free to place a special emphasis on any one of those or have additional items. So I think we picked up a couple. One is an emphasis on the funding, and the other is a mention, at least, of the jobs housing balance. Okay. And with that, we'll continue to monitor legislation, and we'll provide information to you in the interim, and we'll be back in March.
All right. I'm not sure if I brought it up the last time, but one of the concepts that came out of the last U.S. Conference of Mayors was that the city of Minneapolis has just eliminated single-family zoning. Yeah, so think about that. Think how that would fly here, to eliminate single-family housing zoning. And Minneapolis just did that. Yeah. So if you've got a parcel of land with a single-family unit on it, you can put in a triplex. And in fact, they're referring to them as Fryplexes after the Mayor Fry in Minneapolis. So that created quite a bit of a robust discussion. But with that, moving on. Okay, on to, let's see, I think we're on matters initiated at this point. Okay, matters initiated and council reports. Councilmember Coombs.
I missed LAVTA this month for an illness, and that was the only thing I've had to do, but I did have a matter to initiate.
Okay.
I want us to look at a way to... I live a block away from a smoke shop type of place up on East Avenue, and it's too close to the school. And I see kids that are anywhere from 12 and up going in there all the time. I'd like to find a way to ban flavored tobacco product type caffeinated things within our city. And that's a real important place. We got to start that at some point, I think. But it's and if it includes a matter of a distance away from a school that we have to consider, that maybe something is too close to a school to sell that kind of stuff, because kids are using it all over the place in town. You see it almost anywhere if you're downtown, and they are not 18, and that's fairly obvious, but I would really like to look into that.
Councilmember Coomer, if I may, staff is already working to bring back an item to the City Council. We are projecting to bring that back on March 11th. Council initiated matters initiated last year to receive information concerning the extent of its authority to regulate and prohibit vaping, flavored tobacco, and other items. We have met as staff the number of the advocates who are seeking that. We'll be bringing that back to you on March 11th, seeking your direction.
Outstanding. Thank you.
In addition, staff has been in contact with the Intergovernmental Committee, which is the City of Livermore, the school district, as well as the Park District and Las Positas, about potential solutions. And they are looking for guidance and to see what the city does on the 11th. We'll meet with them on the following Thursday.
Yeah, this is a real tough one, because in that same center, of course, there's boba tea, and most of the kids from East Avenue are over there after school, but the rest of them seem to be at the smoke shop, and it's annoying at the very least. Thank you so much for that update.
Very good.
So just as long as we're on that topic, I mean, what we're going to be coming back with on the 11th is the options, and then there's the Intergovernmental Committee meeting on the 21st, and we'll feed back on that. And I would anticipate on the 11th we're going to have a lot of people on the side advocating that we take some action. So that's a lot of work's already underway as to what the options are.
All right. Very good. Thank you. Councilmember Monroe?
So last Wednesday, I attended the LCAC meeting, Livermore Cultural Arts Council. And then this afternoon, I attended the Tri-Valley Transportation Council, LCAC, TVTC, and then I'm going to get to EBCE in a minute. Apparently, all acronyms are 4 letters. TVTC was interesting in that we were discussing Casa, and it was clear even in the group of 5 cities that make up TVTC that there was differences in how the cities wanted to approach even the issue of waiving the transportation tax on the I can't remember the acronyms. It's only 3 letters. Mother-in-law apartments, they're commonly known as. Thank you. ADUs.
Alternative dwelling units.
Anyway.
Accessory.
With regard to EBCE, I met with the executive director, Nick Chazet, to be briefed upon that. Then I went over to one of their informational meetings at Espresso Rosetta and watched them walking various residents through their bills to explain the situation. Livermore has a very high opt-out rate from EBCE, East Bay Community Energy, and the city made the decision to give Livermore residents the choice sometime last year. As part of that, the state required an opt-in. This seems to have confused many residents, and there's a fair amount of discussion, let's just say. So KPIX came out to interview one of the people from Annie Henderson from EBCE, and they asked for me to participate as well. What I said to them, I discussed the fact that the city had given the choice, Livermore residents the choice, but it was a choice as an opt-in, not an opt-out, and that cities who are not participating in this in Alameda County don't have that choice. I also made I pointed out that it's a nonprofit that works towards 100% renewable. I myself opted up so that my family participates in the 100% renewable plan. Up to, in the past 6 months, those people who have participated saved the grand total of 1.5% on their bill. People who are concerned, though, can go February 13th from 4 to 8 at the library, and they can have their bill looked at and explained, or otherwise make their opinions known. And that's all I have. I have no matters initiated.
All right. Councilmember Warner.
Just one quick question. I thought it was opt-out. It's not opt-in, it's opt-out.
I said it wrong. I'm sorry. I meant opt-out.
Right.
Thank you. My apologies.
All right. So the two meetings I attended, one was the Wheels Board last Monday, and that was the first one now that I've been appointed there, and a routine meeting up, although I did get also on the Valley Link Board, so I'll be attending that first meeting this Wednesday, so that's good. The other meeting I went to on last Friday was the Altamont Open Space Committee workshop. I worked with a professor from Berkeley and a grad student, and trying to figure out some algorithms for prioritizing where we would want to spend the money that's accumulating in the account for open space. So that's going well. That's something that I actually initiated there with Dick Schneider from the Sierra Club a year or two ago, and we're finally getting going on that. And it was very interesting. You know, what are the criteria that you want to use to target it? There's stuff within the agreement, but there's also some latitude. So we're trying to figure that out, and it'll be pretty good. One of the exercises we went through was given a few parameters. What did the people in the workshop think the relative ratings were? Then they took those ratings and put them up and said, well, now this is what the maps would look like depending on which individual did the rating. So it'll be valuable, because what we want to do is, you know, even to the extent possible, go beyond just waiting and seeing what happens to having a sense of what's most valuable to the community on filling on the open space, and so that we can move quicker when something becomes available, and maybe have the word out there as to what's important. So that's the overall thought. I have one matters initiated, and this is something that Vice Mayor Carling and I are willing to volunteer for, and that is would like staff to come up with ideas on how the council could interact more with the community. And the example that we're using is that the two of us could be at some coffee shop, and we could announce a topic, and we could maybe even invite commission members from, you know, whether it's the Arts Commission or the Human Services Commission, and we could just have a informal dialogue with the community. I mean, it was pointed out here that this isn't a forum in the sense. This is kind of quite formalized, and so the idea is something informal. So the questions out there are, first of all, does the rest of the council think that's worth thinking about? And if we can get another head to nod there. Sure. I think Bob is still willing to nod his head.
You and
right,
Bob?
Right. So
Bob's already downtown.
So the idea is, what's a reasonable cadence? How to come up with the topics? How to advertise it? Where to hold it? And how to do this? But I think it could be valuable, and it's just an experiment, and we'll see. But it would go along with what we initiated, you know, a while ago on how do we more effectively use social media and other channels to get the word out as to what's happening. So that's the thought. So if you could just come back, and it isn't a rush on this, but it's you know, what makes sense in the next couple of months. I see city attorney was looking a little worried. Was there some problem?
Always.
Always.
You have to be worried all the time.
At the direction of the council, I believe we'll touch on this in your goal setting as well. One thing to keep in mind is, it sounds like you're proposing an ad hoc committee, and
no, not an ad hoc committee. Maybe that's what you want to call it, but that's not what I was saying. Is that what we could do is, through the auspices of staff, set up some meeting cadence in some places, and we can trade off who's there. But for the first meeting or two, it would be Vice Mayor Carling and I, but we would traded around. But the real question is what makes sense here?
And I understand the concept. I will work with staff and we'll respond back to you so we understand what the parameters are for the Brown Act in relationship to a standing committee as well as in relationship to an ad hoc committee, which is, I know that's not the term you're looking for. It won't be a formal subcommittee of the City Council, but those are the rules we need to be cognizant of so you don't end up creating a situation where the Brown Act would apply, which I think is you're trying to have a more informal discussion.
Right. And the reason I was thinking about, rather than calling it a ad hoc subcommittee or something, is that the membership could, I mean, who shows up could be kind of randomly by drawing lots or just who's available on the schedule. So it's not a fixed group that goes each time, but it's just a chance for less than, so we don't violate the Brown Act, we have less than a majority show up and just talk.
And we will work through with that direction. We will work through with the City Council to determine what the parameters are of the Brown Act, and so we don't run afoul inadvertently.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Warner, Vice Mayor Carling.
Thank you. So on the 29th of January, Councilmember Monroe and I spent several hours touring some of the homeless services that that the city provides, and I appreciate Mr. Scott's being here every council meeting and reminding us how much more we could be doing. But it was educational for the two of us to spend the day seeing what the city already has to offer, and it was put together by Mr. Uranga and Claudia Young, who works for Mr. Uranga, and they did an excellent job. And I'm just going to tick off some of the things for the sake of inclusion here in terms of what the city offers. First of all, there's Access Health and Krill. So Access Health is right next door, and Krill is next door as well. Krill helps people with disabilities find housing. We then went out to Vineyard 2.0. So Vineyard's where Open Heart Kitchen used to reside and provide meals. It's out of North Livermore. And we saw the plans there that are taking shape, and met some of the folks that are very enthusiastic in supporting that in a couple of different ways. And then we also, at the same place, we heard about some representatives from some of the churches in town that are willing to provide safe parking in their own parking lots. And so again, this is something that's moving forward, admittedly slower than some people would like, but we are continuing to look for how we could provide safe parking for those that need a place to park their vehicles in the evening and feel safe and secure in that particular way that they want to live. And again, there's some churches that are willing to provide that space. We then went out to Stony Creek, which is out on East Avenue near Vasco, which is run by Eden Housing for affordable housing and low-income housing. And CityServe was also there. They're a wonderful organization of volunteers that help the homeless. For example, they've already placed 3 homeless families. I know that's not a lot, but it's 3 more than we had a year or so ago. And homeless families at the particular out at Stony Creek. Then we went over to when they had the fire out on Vineyard a while back. Open Heart Kitchen moved to Asbury, so we went over there when they were feeding the group of folks there that afternoon. And then we also saw the spot where, again, at Asbury, where they offer showers and laundry for those that need it. And so my only point is that we spent some time ourselves with some of the folks from staff in terms of understanding what the city has to offer today and looking for ways that we can build on that in the future. I also wanted to just call out this community and Tri-Valley, I think, are places we all talk about what a great place Livermore is and the valley is to live. Another event that happened on Friday night last week was Night to Shine over at the fairgrounds. If you don't know what Night to Shine is, it was formed by Tim Tebow the guy that won the Heisman Trophy several years ago, but it's for, they create this prom atmosphere for folks with special needs that are 14 years or older. And they, honestly, they have like 1,000 volunteers and 500 people show up for this thing. And our own city police provided security. So I want to thank Chief and his staff for participating in that, because it's a wonderful event. I mean, it was pouring rain at the beginning, but I don't think it dampened, pun intended, anybody's spirits. And that's a great thing that this community participates in. And I know that, I think the chief and some of his staff actually gave him escorts from Livermore over there with the lights flashing and so on and so forth. How cool is that for some of those folks, that for a special evening out? I don't have any matters initiated. I did wonder about Mr. Stein's question about the trees, though. Is there an answer for that?
We do have an answer for that. Yes, the objective of the contract is actually to enlarge the tree wells, and in the case of the side on South Livermore, to actually move the curb out away from the tree trunks a little bit.
But saving the trees as we
Very much is sort of the idea behind it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
All right, very good. Thank you. Yeah, the Night to Shine is an amazing event.
It is.
Last year. It's
Yep.
just- Okay, let's see. Wednesday, January. Before I get too far, regarding the coffee with the council, the police chief, they had a program for a while, coffee with the cops, and so you might check with them to see what the success of that was. That I know that when I did one of the efforts that I've had to increase. I'm not getting too far afield, am I? Okay, good. Okay, so one of the, check with the city attorney, but to increase community outreach, I started a community state of the city, and the last state of the city that we had, there were, I think, more candidates and staff there than there were actual general public. So you make an effort to bring in the community. But recognizing sometimes the community has enough information and they're happy to be where they are. So I applaud your effort and I wish you great success. So I've kind of been there and done that
have
too.
to bring pizza or donuts, I guess.
Yeah. So January 30th, I was at an all-day advocacy with the other Tri-Valley mayors. We went up to Sacramento and met with Assembly members Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, the newly elected, also Tim Grayson, and also we met with Senator Ann Caballero, Senator Steve Glazer, and the staff of Scott Wiener, talking about our concerns about a number of the issues down here related to transportation and also CASA. We met with the Department of Parks and Recreation about projects around the Iron Horse Trail and also the expansion of the open space areas between Carnegie and Tesla parks. January 31st, I participated in a webinar on homelessness. It was a nationwide webinar with 74 other mayors from across the country talking about the strategies, and that expanding shelters has been proven that it doesn't work. The only strategy that's worked across the entire United States is the housing first model. And that's what Orlando has done, Houston has done, Salt Lake City, very successful. It comes down to resources, and we'll be leveraging resources from HUD and also from the VA to make that work here. Today was the Alameda County Transportation Commission. We had the 580 Express Lane. In December, there were 652,000 trips along the Express Lane. 4.3 million so far this fiscal year. The westbound, there's a 15-mile-per-hour differential, and eastbound up to 25 miles per hour differential improvement within the express lanes. Tolls are up to $12 a day, or $12 per trip, and the average is around $3.60, and all those dollars stay within that transportation corridor. The Planning, Policy, and Legislative Committee talked about the SB 1 that estimates next upcoming year $4.8 billion in SB 1 funds, $1.2 billion going to cities and counties for local road repair, $1.2 billion for the repair and maintenance of the state highway system, $400 million for the state bridges and culverts, $307 million for trade corridors, $250 million for congested commute corridors. So those are your SB1 dollars at work right now to improve the transportation within this within our region. $458 million for local transit operations, $386 million for capital improvements for transit and intercity rail. Also, we voted on moving ahead with a program to enhance rail safety throughout the area. And with that, that's all I've got. So with that, we've got the special meeting coming up for the goals and priorities. That's Tuesday, February 19th at 1:30. That's going to be here at the library community room. And then on to a special council meeting Thursday the 21st, and that's going to be to select the next members of our planning commission, and then to a regular city council meeting on Monday, February 25th. With that, thank you very much.